Welcome back to How to Program, and this is episode number 12, JavaScript Basic Keywords. So let's go a little bit into what JavaScript is. So JavaScript is just a name for a particular language, which is primarily used on the web to make websites interactive. And by interactive, I mean that when you click on something, something happens, like the content of the page changes or moves around. You can also use JavaScript to run code that doesn't run on the web, like inside of your web browser, the program that you use to go look at websites. But most commonly, this is where it's used. JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, which means that you do not have to tell the computer what the variable type of your variables is. You just put some values in there and it figures it out for you. Freeing up memory is managed for you, and usually people say JS for short, usually lowercase, not uppercase though. The origins of JavaScript, which by the way, don't confuse this with Java. Java is a different language which has really nothing to do with JavaScript. But JavaScript itself was created in 1995, so it's a fairly recent language. And it was created by someone who was working at Netscape and named Brendan Eich, and Netscape then became Mozilla. The name JavaScript was somewhat of a marketing move at the time because Java was a very popular language and they wanted people to adopt JavaScript, so they were trying to ride the wave of Java, which is why the names are fairly similar even though the languages have nothing to do with each other. Why did I pick JavaScript? People were asking this question in the last video. Because JavaScript requires a very simple setup to start writing code. It doesn't require you to use a compiler, which is this, as we went over, this program that translates your code into a lower level machine code for the computer. And that compilers tend to be hard to use the first time you deal with them. And so that's something that I try not to have beginners use. Other languages also require a lot of setup code, quote unquote, like other code, before you can actually just start writing your own program. And in JavaScript, you can just start typing and you can start giving the computer instructions as to what to do, and it will execute your instructions and just go right ahead without too much setup required. And eventually, you'll learn JavaScript. Look, if you're going to be a programmer, I know almost no one who's never ever had to build a website or write some sort of website or web page or something, and when you want to do something with that is more than just displaying content on a website, you need JavaScript. So you might as well learn that first because it will be useful. Now there's an acronym here we're going to define, which is a REPL, and a REPL is an acronym which stands for Read, Evaluate, Print, Loop. And what it is a REPL is actually itself a computer program which accepts or reads your lines of code in a certain language. It interprets them and then it runs them immediately. So it evaluates them. It goes, okay, what does that mean? Good, do this instruction. And then it prints the results. And then you can type the next line of code and then go back to the beginning, basically, which is the read step. So that makes a loop. So you're doing the same thing over and over again. So basically what this is you're typing some code, hitting enter, the computer runs the code, and then you get to see the results of that. And then you type the next line and the computer runs the code, that kind of thing. So, and you can also type multiple lines at once and then just run the whole thing and then do the same thing over again. And so in this way, you can very quickly test out, small bits of your code or quote unquote play around with a particular language. It's a good way to learn a new language. There's a lot of ways to getting access to a JavaScript REPL. And the most simple one is to go to this website. And there's other websites like this. And basically what this will allow you to do is, without having to set up anything, you can just type some code and see the results. And all the exercises that we're going to do at the beginning of JavaScript are going to be in this environment because it's the easiest way. You don't have to set up anything. It will just work. This is what the website looks like. Your code goes on the left-hand side, you type it, and it has the line numbers on the left. I'll probably use the line numbers to refer to the different lines of code. When you click on the run button at the top, your code gets executed, and then your output of what your code actually printed goes on the right-hand side. Okay, let's go a little bit into more of the details of code. So code itself is broken down into different statements. A statement is a single instruction in code, a single instruction concept of what you're trying to get the computer to do. It's kind of equivalent to a single sentence in a human language, stating one single thing to be done. Like, we break down our languages in sentences, and it's just you're expressing a single concept and then you're done. And then the next sentence starts and you express another concept and then you're done. One computer code, this is the same thing. A statement is just one concept being given to the computer to execute, and then you're done. So in JavaScript, when you finish a statement, you must end it with a semicolon. This is the dot with a comma below it. In English, a semicolon would be used to separate major parts of a sentence from each other without ending the sentence, but in computer code, like JavaScript, certain languages, the semicolon is redefined to mean the end of a statement. So it doesn't mean the same thing as in English. It means something different when you see it in computer code. You have to be careful with a lot of symbols in computer programming have a different meaning than they do outside of computer programming. So don't just expect that because you've seen a symbol and you know how it's used in just general English or something like that, that you can just assume that it has the same meaning in computer code. Just be very careful with that. Okay, and then we have something called a variable, which we've gone over before, which is basically data stored in a certain piece of memory, and that piece of memory is called a variable. In JavaScript, you cannot specify the type of the variable. That is actually what makes the language dynamic, which means that based on the data that you put inside the variable, whether it's an int, a float, a string, a boolean, whatever it is, JavaScript will just automatically store that in the variable, and you can't specify the type. Now each variable has to be given a name. Variable names must be unique. You can't have the same two variable names in the same program, although a little bit more on this later because it's not quite the full truth of that, but we'll explain more on that later. Variable names are case sensitive, meaning that upper and lowercase symbols for the same letter are different. So like if I say JavaScript or foo with a capital F, for example, it's not the same name as foo with a lowercase f, and those would be two different variables. So you just have to be careful, just be consistent with how you name your variables. Certain words are part of the language itself, like they have a meaning in the language itself, so you can't use them as variable names because they're language words, and they're called reserved words or language words, and you can't use them as variable names. And you'll learn what these are as we progress, so don't worry about figuring out what they are so far. We'll get there. Now, how do we create a variable in JavaScript? Okay, so the keyword var is a reserved word, and it's used to say, I'm creating a variable. After var, you put a space, and then you put the name that you want to give the variable. Now, names can't have spaces, so the name itself cannot have a space in the middle of it. So you can use an underscore instead of a space if you want to break up your name with multiple words. But yeah, no spaces. And then after this, you put a single equal sign. And the single equal sign means give this variable the following value. And after that, you put the value itself. Like you put a number or true or a string in quotation marks, that kind of thing. So here are some statements that create different variables in JavaScript and store things. So the first one is line 1. It says var space my integer equals 1 semicolon, because that's the end of a statement. So that's one whole complete statement, is that whole line. The second line creates a float. My float equals 2.3. And when I read equals, just be careful because it's not the mathematic equals like saying like, oh, these two things are the same. It means no, give this value to this variable. So it's actually has a different meaning. Var my string on line 3. Hello, I am a piece of text in programming. This is called a string. Good, so that's the string. And line 4, var my boolean equals true. Good. Lowercase t for the true. Some languages have an uppercase t. And false is all lowercase as well. Just be careful with that. Let's break it down even a little further. So the var keyword again says I want to create a new variable to hold a value. The name of the variable follows this, my integer, but we could call it anything, cat, surfboard, whatever you want to call it. And then there are language keywords, and they get highlighted in blue or purple in this particular environment. Like if you're using repl.it, that website, the keywords will get highlighted and some of the things will get highlighted different colors. This is just to make it so that you can see more easily, and when you get used to seeing the colors, it actually helps speed up how fast you can read the code and understand what's going on. And then the equal sign means give this variable the following value. This is also called an assignment operator. An operator is any symbol that says to do a particular operation, like plus, minus, equals, that kind of thing. 1 is the actual value that we're putting inside the variable. The semicolon ends the statement. Good. Assigning values. So that's what we just did. Giving a variable a value, like we just saw, is called assigning a value to that variable. And again, the single equal sign is not called equals. It's called an assignment operator. We went over that. Now, how do we then see the value of our variable after we created it? Well, there are other ways of doing this, and if you look online, you'll find other ways, but I want to get there so that you understand what we're doing when we do get there with those other ways of seeing the value of a particular variable. So for now, this very simple way of seeing the value inside of our variable is to just, as a whole statement, just have the name of the variable. See, line 2 is just the name of the variable, semicolon, and what that will do is actually output the value of the variable when we run the code. And that has to be the last line. For now, this is how we're going to do it. It has to be the last line of your code, which will print that value, basically. Now, sometimes we want to copy. We have data in one variable, and we want to copy it to another variable. And we can do this by just using the assignment operator. So, we create an integer called myInteger, and we assign it the value 1. And then on the second line, we say myInteger copy is assigned the value myInteger. And so in this case, we are copying the value. Now, you have to imagine there's now 2 slots in memory holding the value 1, but changes to 1 don't affect the other. So if we change then, if we had a third line that said myInteger copy equals 2, myInteger, the original value, like the original variable, would still be equals to 1. You see, so these things they don't get linked, because you said the equal sign. That's why I was saying be careful with this equal sign, because this equal sign means give this variable this value or copy this value into this variable. It does not mean those things are now linked somehow. Some people get this confused, and then it's really bad after that to untangle them. So, and we can actually see that this is true, because if we then change the value of the original, let's say we changed myInteger and we now set that to 2, but at the end we print the copy still holds the value 1. You see, you have to read the code from the first line on down to see what's happening. You read it from the top down and kind of build a mental model of what the computer is going to be doing. Like, remember that the computer is doing these instructions step by step for you, and there's this memory space, like this electronic memory that's holding this data for you, and as it goes along, the memory gets changed, and that's how you kind of build a mental model of what your code is doing, and that's how you figure out what the code is doing when you're reading it, or as you're typing it. This is how you do it. So in this case, the output of myInteger copy is 1, because even though we changed myInteger on line 3, the data was already copied into myInteger copy on line 2, and the code runs down. It doesn't go back up. So now there's a good practice, which is to add comments to your code. And comments is just a way of adding a bit of text and it's fully your text. This is like human text, sentences, or just a word, or whatever it is, to remember and leave some clues about what your code is doing for yourself or for someone else that's going to work on your code if you're working on a team. There's 2 ways of adding comments. You can add comments at the end of a line, and you have to start them with // like //. No space in between them, just // and then whatever you put after that up till the end of the line is going to be ignored by JavaScript. It's just going to be treated as if it didn't exist. It's just going to ignore it. And then if you need more than 1 line's worth of comments, then you put your comments in between this /*, and then you end it with a */. And then everything that comes in between those 2 gets totally ignored and is not treated as code. It's like it didn't exist, right? So for example, on line 1, we have a comment at the end of the line. It says, here's a comment. You see it highlights it in green because it's a comment, and it says, I'm ignoring that. And then we have several lines here that are just going to get ignored of comments. This is very useful to see when you go back to your code, or when you read old code, or you read someone else's code, or someone else reads your code, that they can get some sort of human information about what your code is doing without having to read the whole thing necessarily. Okay, so now we're going to do an exercise. So go to repl.it and select JavaScript as the language. And then there was a link earlier in the presentation, but I'll put it in the description of the video also. And what I want you to do is I want you to create a variable named temperature and give it the value 75.4. That's a pretty nice temperature. On the next in line, you're going to create a variable named temperature2. And in that, you're going to copy temperature's value into it. Then you're going to assign the value 71.3 to temperature. And finally, on a new line, we're going to print temperature2. And don't forget your semicolons at the end of every line. This is something that takes a while to get used to, so start early. Start really getting used to typing the semicolon at the end of the line and not forgetting it. And then share your code in the video's comments below. I want to see what you're writing, and if you're running into any issues, ask questions, and I will help you fix it. And next time we will go over how to do basic math, arithmetic, number operations in JavaScript. And you can also like our Facebook page to get updates as soon as the episodes come out, and I really recommend you do that. And if you really like our channel, you can also like the video, comment, and subscribe, and let us know that you like it. All right, we'll see you next time.